This episode is about Christian Picciolini, who is a man who's devoted himself, apparently, to deprogramming extremist, right-wing, white national men.
Most of the people I work with have never had a meaningful interaction with the people they claim to hate. Jews, African Americans, or the counter-protesters at the Charlottesville rally. What saved me was interacting with the people I thought were my enemies.
But for some reason, on August 14th, 2018, he decided to go after Stefan Molyneux, Sam Harris, and Jordan Peterson, all within one tweet. To quote, "The most dangerous white nationalists brainwashing us are not always people like Richard Spencer or David Duke. Those who mask their intentions behind pseudo-philosophy, race realism, misogyny, and skepticism, like Stefan Molyneux, Sam Harris, and Jordan Peterson." Okay, so in that cluster of thought, pseudo-philosophy, race realism, misogyny, and skepticism are all of the same feather, just as Stefan Molyneux, Sam Harris, and Jordan Peterson, they're all of the same feather. This feather is worse than Richard Spencer or David Duke, who he is on the record for saying that he is much more likely to befriend Richard Spencer than apparently he will Sam Harris org. Now, Christian Picciolini does have something with Sam Harris org. Sam Harris invited Christian Picciolini on his show a few months back, and they had a conversation which Sam subsequently edited and took out about 6 minutes, if not more, from this podcast or this talk that they two had. I don't necessarily want to focus on the particulars or on the characters of this. I want to look at the mode of discourse itself, which starts out with guilt by association. Now, this guilt by association tactic is very potent insofar as it aligns people against a group, right? If you can see this person and their arguments as connected to these other bad people, then you can discount the arguments that that person has that's arguing against you. You can just cast all of those people into the same kind of arena and say that their ideas are off limits or open to dismissal. Why would Christian be putting all these people into a camp and drawing a line between himself and those other people? Is that not the same thing that these white nationalists have done with people of other races? Mark them all in this outsider group, and therefore you're on the insider group. Is that not the same maneuver? And I think that this is kind of a cliche, that the people who are the most fundamentalist and radical are usually the converts to a religion. And what they bring to that religion is their own fundamentalism and their own rigidity of belief and their own fervency of conviction. That's the constant from any camp, from any ideology that has fundamentalism within it. It's not the ideology necessarily that is fundamental, but it's the way that these people interact with ideas. And I think that that itself is what leads people into being a radical or a reactionary or anything that's very combative. It's almost as if fundamentalism is it's a character trait. And no matter if somebody jumps from one place to another, they will bring their own radicalism with them and turn any house they land in into a fortress from which they strike out from. Now, it's interesting that he would not see him doing the same maneuver that white nationalists do to other people. Why would that be the case? To continue with the thread, he writes, "They are gateway drugs to the harder stuff. A feeder mechanism, if you will." I don't know what a feeder mechanism is. "At best, they are knowingly being highly irresponsible and intellectually lazy. At worst, they are invisible whatnits by design. Sam has over 1 million followers. Jordan has the #1 book in the country. Stefan has millions of views on his videos. I'd say they are pretty influential. I just want people to know their coded hate language is reaching a lot of unsuspecting people, including you all reading this." Now, if we go back to that picture of him showing the symbols of the far white nationalists or the far right nationalists or the alt-right nationalists or the alt-white nationalist, whatever. He's going through and he's decoding for us that secret society that's emblazoned on these tattoos. And he's doing the same thing with these intellectuals. So what he's going to do when he actually has data is that he's going to point to very short little sentences taken out of context, and those sentences are supposed to act like icons. They're supposed to act like tattoos, right? So I think that his mode of engaging with, the cultural sphere is to look at things in a cartoony fashion, which is another modality of the fundamentalist, or somebody who is very rigid and not very flexible, not very imaginative, is not taken to variating symbols, but usually always variate symbols into a specific form that's rather basic. So this way of thinking is the same way of thinking that does that to other people. It's racist thinking. Racism is just a version of this distillation of reality into chunks that we can move around and control, more or less, or that release certain emotions that people feed off of that give them a sense of power. But still, if you line up a certain number of these statements in a row, and you have people that are very convicted in their belief or need to be convicted into a belief. They believe these tenets and then they become racist, right? And so when you interact with something that's much more complex, like let's say the Bible or the Quran or like Jordan Peterson's videos, like all of Jordan Peterson's videos, if you took all those hundreds of hours of him talking, then you can go through and you can project a chunky story onto it and see how he's making a certain sense that if people start to interact with this stuff, they're going to start to interact with this other stuff that's more blatantly racist or bigoted or wrong. To continue, here's the thing. Whether they are openly sympathetic to white nationalism or not, Sam and Jordan are pushing garbage ideas that are the same tired tropes for white nationalists. Example given, race IQ, gender norms, etc., and leading people there. Stefan is a different open book altogether. So now he's distinguishing between Stefan Molyneux, who I don't know too well, and Jordan and Sam. And I don't really know Sam all that well. I've interacted with Jordan more than any of those three. But he's now separating Stefan Molyneux out. But there's still that notion, that assertion that whether or not they are openly sympathetic to white nationalism or not, their ideas are pushing garbage that have the same tired tropes for white nationalism. So their ideas, according to Christian, the ideas of Sam and Jordan rhyme, let's say, or have some sort of relationship to white nationalism. And what exactly is that relationship? Is it a nuanced relationship or is it a one-to-one? Can you just equate? Can you draw lines from what Jordan said to white nationalism? I think you can do that with any text. That's the operation of the imagination and the interpretive function to make one thing mean something else, or to see how it resonates with something else, or to see how it, relates, whether positively or negatively, to another thing. I think there's something fruitful in the pun of idioplasticity, of the ability to interact with ideas as fungible, as things that can be manipulatable, as things that are in flux. And the opposite of that would be idiocalcification, where ideas take on a very firm, orderly appearance and connect directly, no matter how convoluted. They still directly link to these other ideas over here. The ability to do that comes with conviction, right, and strength of will, but the inability not to do that is one of the signatures of somebody who will be taken up in a fundamentalist behavior. Now, it doesn't mean to say that there aren't structures that unlock fundamentalism or, softly provide fundamentalism into you, which I think might be something that Christian is attempting to say about Peterson, but what I'm directly attributing to his inability to interact with Peterson's ideas in a more complex, nuanced way, but only to be collapsing them into his idiocalcification. And I'm probably using fungible wrong. To continue, I would entertain a clarification from Sam and Jordan about their views on this, so he's kind of calling them out. He's still open to hearing them disprove his formulation of them as white nationalists. And it's interesting in this realm of public intellectuals that they can call one another out and engage in more dialogue, right? But at the same time, there's a way of calling somebody out where you go and put them in a box and then have them prove that they're not in that box. Christian is accusing them of being aligned with this or somehow feeding into this, and it's now their job to prove that they're not, which is another interesting thing. Not only is there guilt by association in play, but there's this manner of the accuser no longer needing to shoulder the burden of proof. It's rather the accused responsibility to free themselves from the accusation of bigot, right? Or the accusation of belonging in this camp or that camp. And I think that Christian, again, is projecting a tribalistic way of viewing cultural interaction, which might be useful for him to teach a better cultural reaction to people, but now he's still modeling that fundamentalist or accusatory or I'm right, you're wrong, you need to repent and be saved, right, kind of underlining tone. It's still this religious devotion to a moral framework. To continue, to clarify, I am not claiming that Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson are white nationalists. Molyneux, you decide. What I'm saying is that their ideas on race, IQ, cultural Marxism, and identity are old white nationalist tropes that are infecting more people than Spencer and Duke. Is he saying that, like, we've heard that there's white forms of knowledge, that rationality is white, that clinical psychology is a white form of knowledge? Is that what he's saying? Or is he saying that white nationalists have abused, or ethnocentrists have abused different ideas that have come from science? Therefore, those who interact with the same concepts are inherently aligned with the people who have misused them, which is another form of tainting a certain sector of debate, to diminish the ability for ideas to be used in more than one way, for ideas to be flexible, for icons to have ambiguity and to have the ability to change meaning over time or change meaning within context. To wrap up his original thread, and to be quite honest, if you look through the comments on this thread from people named at Western Identity and others that are obvious, maybe just to me, a former Nazi, coded Nazi accounts, you'll see that their staunch support of these ideas might make you think again. What's an obvious coded Nazi account? It's either coded or it's obvious, right? But his speciality is interpreting white nationalism. So maybe, in effect, he's seeing that wherever he looks. Or whenever he suspends his agreement with a camp, or whenever his skepticism is engaged, he automatically sees the pattern of what he's looking for as the enemy in what people are saying, and showing how any given text, any given thinker, or the thinkers who, for whatever reason, disturb him, are somehow part and parcel of that which has harmed him, or that which he is taking responsibility has harm in the world. So there is the work that he's doing, and he just started this TV show. I don't know why he's going after these intellectuals, these very public, influential intellectuals right after launching his show, but maybe he's hoping that he can mac on their attention or stir up some sort of clamor that he can then use to extract more TV from and to lay out what he thinks is going on from his own framework. But my basic critique is that his framework, if he is using his framework of what white nationalism is, not only to connect with white nationalists who are actually white nationalists, but to prove that other people are responsible for white nationalism or somehow are responsible, then he can perhaps justify his own slip into that and see that he himself was hoodwinked along the way into believing this thing, and that he can use that story to these people who are there, say, no, you've been gaslit. He's doing deprogramming work, so he's working with rejiggering somebody's ideology, somebody's ideology that has been taken to a psychological dimension, right? Like that's colored all of their interactions with life. And so if you can use that tactic of like, well, you were drawn here very gradually. It wasn't anything inherent in you that caused you to act this way. It was that you were tricked. right? That relieves the responsibility and the pain for being mistaken from the person, perhaps long enough for them to get out of that position and no longer be defensive, right? So it can be used as a tactic to, relieve somebody of responsibility for their actions and their behavior and where they are in order for them to release themselves from that. So there's definitely a use to do that, but it can also be blatantly abused when you use that to disown responsibility and furthermore malign by alignment people who you have some sort of internet disagreement with. Anyhow, that's a short one. I hope you guys are doing fine. I had a bunch of interviews lined up this week, but they all got pinged over to next week. So look forward to more of me in the following time span.